she'll listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath, turn off the lights, leave the world behind, and get ready to drift. Between dreams and shadows, setting the atmosphere, the ticking of the clock on the nightstand was the only sound that filled the room. A soft, repetitive rhythm, steady as a metronome, slicing through the silence of 3:17 a.m. Marcus lay still beneath the covers, eyes half open in the moonlight that filtered in through the narrow gap between the curtains. The pale glow painted everything in shades of silver and shadow, reducing familiar objects into vague outlines. His room was as he'd left it, tidy, undisturbed, and cold. He hadn't moved in what felt like hours. It wasn't unusual for Marcus to wake up in the middle of the night. Insomnia had always followed him, creeping into the corners of his mind like mold in an abandoned house. But lately, there had been something else. Not just sleeplessness. Something more. He could feel it before he understood it. A subtle pressure in the air, like the heavy quiet that comes just before a storm. His breath misted slightly in the cold, even though it wasn't winter yet. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders and blinked slowly. That was when he noticed it again, that sense. The eerie conviction that he wasn't alone. His eyes shifted to the far corner of the room. There was nothing there, just the coat rack and the tall mirror, which reflected only the quiet glow of his nightstand lamp. But it was as if something behind the mirror was watching him, not from the reflection, but through it, waiting. His phone screen lit up with the time, 3:18 a.m. He hadn't touched it. Marcus flinched. The phone dimmed on its own. No notifications, no calls, just that time. He sat up, slowly, the blanket rustling softly. The cold bit into his spine. The silence deepened, dense and unnatural. There was something hanging in the room that didn't belong. A weight, a stillness too absolute to be real. His apartment was small, studio style, a kitchenette to the left, the bathroom down a short hall, and everything else open except that recently, it hadn't felt open at all. It felt occupied, not physically, not in a way that would leave footprints, but in that primal, animal sense of being watched in the dark. At first, Marcus had chalked it up to paranoia. Long work nights, a messed up sleep cycle, too much caffeine. He even joked with himself about sleep paralysis. Maybe next time I'll see the Hat Man, he'd mutter sarcastically. But when the joke no longer made him smile, something inside him began to tremble. He started avoiding mirrors after midnight. Something about his reflection after 3 a.m. unnerved him, not what it showed, but how it made him feel, like his own image was studying him. Now, with the minutes ticking slowly past, Marcus sat in a room that no longer felt like his. The temperature dropped again. A soft creak sounded from somewhere near the kitchen, though nothing moved. And still, that feeling, that something was right at the edge of awareness, lingering, unseen. A crawling unease wrapped itself around his spine, cold and patient. He didn't know it yet, but this night would not let him go so easily. The first signs of disturbance remained perfectly still. His ears strained in the quiet for any repeat of the sound from the kitchen. Maybe it had been the fridge, or the wood contracting from the night air. That's what he told himself, but the explanation felt too easy, like a paper wall covering a hole that went much deeper. He got up, barefoot, careful not to make a sound. The hardwood floor was icy beneath his feet. He approached the kitchenette slowly, each step deliberate, his breath shallow. Nothing seemed out of place. The utensils hung neatly. The kettle sat exactly where he'd left it, and the cupboards were all closed. But something had changed. The chair at the small breakfast table had shifted, just a few inches, barely noticeable. You knew. Marcus always kept it tucked under the table. Habit, reflex. It was one of those things you didn't need to think about until something was wrong. He reached out and pushed it back in. It scraped softly across the floor, louder than expected in the silence, and then a fluttering shadow in the hallway mirror. Marcus spun, heart thumping against his ribs. The mirror stood motionless, reflecting only the hallway, the dim living room, and nothing else. But he was certain he'd seen movement. Quick, like a hand withdrawing, or something retreating into the walls of the world. He stared at the mirror for a long time, his own breath fogging in the chill air. The corners of his vision pulsed. He rubbed his eyes, trying to break the spell. When he turned away, another sound followed, a soft thud behind him. He turned again. The chair was out. Again, farther this time, pulled completely away from the table. Marcus backed up toward the bed instinctively, cold sweat forming along his spine. This wasn't his imagination. This wasn't faulty memory. Something was moving things, quietly, precisely, as if to test whether he would notice. A panic began to bloom at the edge of his mind, but it was still distant, controlled. He sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the chair, refusing to blink. "I'm dreaming," he whispered, his voice a tremor. "I'm still asleep. Sleep paralysis." But he could move. He could breathe freely. There was no weight on his chest, no shadowy figure by the bed, and yet it felt worse than paralysis, because he wasn't frozen. He was awake, and he was being observed. Suddenly, the lamp on the nightstand flickered once, then again, then went dark. The room was plunged into shadow. A long moment passed. In that blackness, something began to shift, not loudly, but subtly. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen. The corners grew deeper. The outlines of his furniture seemed to bend, like they were being redrawn by something that didn't fully understand human geometry. Then, from the direction of the bathroom, a new sound, a breath, slow, deliberate, not his own. Marcus froze. He stared into the darkness, his heart now pounding against the walls of his chest. And that was when he noticed something that made his blood run colder than ever before. The mirror in the hallway had begun to fog over, as if something stood in front of it, breathing, watching, something unseen, but very much present. The sound that shouldn't exist. Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. The room was cloaked in black, no glow from the streetlight outside, no flicker from the dead lamp. Only the faintest outlines remained, and even they seemed to pulse and shift in the dark like they were alive. But the sound didn't wait. It started as a hum, low, almost beneath hearing, a vibration more than a noise, like an old radio left on just past the frequency of a station. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, not through the air but the walls, the floor, the mirror, a frequency that didn't belong in a living space. Marcus clenched the edge of the bed. The hum deepened, evolving into something stranger, whisper. Not one voice, several, speaking too fast and too low to understand. They poured through the stillness like water from a cracked pipe, soft but constant. Not gibberish, but language without meaning, like syllables rearranged into something only half human. He rose slowly, turning toward the hallway mirror. It was still fogged, the breath on it recent and heavy, as if whatever had stood there had only just moved away. Then came the click, a crisp, deliberate noise from the kitchen, like a fingernail tapping the countertop. Once, then twice, then again, rhythmic, intentional. He couldn't take his eyes off the mirror, even though he knew the sound was behind him now. The whispers grew bolder, barely skimming the edge of comprehension. His name might have been in them or something, near his name. He didn't know what was worse, that something invisible was whispering, or that part of him wanted to listen. A sudden noise snapped his attention. The faucet turned on by itself. Marcus leaped up, startled, heart in his throat. Cold water gushed from the kitchen sink for 3 seconds, then stopped. Silence returned. Total, unnatural silence. And in that stillness came the softest, clearest whisper yet. From just behind his left ear. "It sees you now." He whipped around. Nothing. No figure, no voice, no one there. But the whisper hadn't been imagined. He felt the heat of its breath, the slight pressure of its presence. It had been right there, leaning in, speaking directly into the fragile cage of his mind. He stumbled back and grabbed his phone. The screen wouldn't turn on. No light, no vibration, just black glass. Useless dot. He was alone, but he wasn't. And that was when he realized the humming hadn't gone. It had simply moved inside his head. Not a sound anymore. A presence. Something pushing up against the walls of his thoughts, searching for a crack to slip through. The whispers were no longer external. They had taken root in the quiet places of his mind. And the worst part, they made sense now. The presence without a face. Marcus stood in the darkness, paralyzed not from fear, but from understanding. Something was here, inside the apartment, not in a physical sense. It didn't occupy space the way people did. It didn't creak floorboards or cast shadows, like a body might, but it was present like static in the air, or the charge before a lightning strike. He took a step toward the mirror, not because he wanted to, but because some unseen thread was pulling him. Something gentle, yet insistent. The air around him thickened with every breath. Moving felt like wading through invisible water. The fog on the mirror hadn't faded. In fact, it was spreading slowly, silently, like condensation on glass in a locked room with no air dot. And that's when he saw it. Just for a moment. A distortion in the reflection. Not a face, not even a shape. Just a wrongness. A brief shiver across the mirror's surface, like heat waves rippling on asphalt. But this was cold, inhumanly cold. The kind of chill that crept inward, frosting thoughts before skin. He blinked and it was gone. But something else had changed. A book had fallen from the shelf near the foot of his bed. Marcus stared at it, unmoving. He hadn't touched it, hadn't even walked near it. The spine faced upward, and the pages were splayed out unnaturally, as if they had been rifled through quickly by invisible hands. And then, he felt it, not a touch, a gaze. His skin prickled. Goosebumps ran across his arms and neck. That unmistakable sensation of being watched, studied. But the room was empty. He turned around slowly, scanning every corner. The chair, the table, the hallway. Stillness. Then he looked up. There was nothing on the ceiling, nothing he could see, but he knew it was there, hovering, observing, not blinking. He reached for the lamp switch again. No response. He flicked it harder, shaking it. Still. Dark. That's when something across the room moved. A glass on the kitchen counter tilted, rotated an inch hand, then stopped. Not from vibration, not gravity, not accident, intention. Marcus stepped back instinctively. His foot knocked over the book on the floor again, sending it into a spin, but he didn't dare bend to pick it up. The hum in his skull pulsed, not painful, but penetrating, the way some dreams leave you feeling hollow and full at once. He whispered aloud, "What do you want?" No answer, but on the mirror, new fog bloomed faster, this time spreading thick, clouding the glass entirely. And through that fog, a handprint began to appear, pressed from the inside. 5 slender fingers, palm flat, no features, no reflection, no body, just the print. Then a second appeared beside it, then a third. Too many. Far too many for a single being. Marcus staggered backward. He realized something then. With absolute clarity, this presence was not trying to be seen. It was trying to see him, learn him, read the shape of his thoughts like pages in a journal. It had no face, because it did not need one. It wore the room like a mask, moved through silence like a current. It wasn't here, in the way things are here. It simply was. And it had chosen him. The unspoken, warning Marcus couldn't sleep, not because he feared what was in the dark, but because he feared what knew him now. The mirror no longer reflected anything but fog, dense, saturated, a living veil between this world and something else. The handprints remained, though they were no longer still. Every few minutes, they would subtly shift as if whatever pressed against the glass was adjusting its grip, or getting closer. The whispers had gone quiet. That was somehow worse. He sat on the edge of his bed, phone still dead in his hands, listening to the empty air breathe around him. The hum inside his skull had lowered to a tremor, like a far-off engine beneath the ocean. Not painful, just there, persistent. Watching, then came the pattern. 3 soft taps on the wall. Pause. 2 taps. Tops, then 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. Marcus held. His breath dotted repeated again, slower this time. Then once more, but backward. 1, 2, 3. He looked toward the wall and whispered, "What are you trying to say?" As if in response, a single knock came from inside the closet. He turned sharply. The door was closed, as always. Nothing had moved, yet the knock had been real, controlled, like a coded message wrapped in dread. He rose, step by slow step, and approached the closet. The doorknob was ice cold. For a long moment, he didn't move, just stood there, listening. The silence deepened, but not passively. It was listening back then. From inside the closet, a sound like scraping, soft, sharp, metallic, something small being dragged across wood. It stopped just as suddenly. He opened the door. Nothing, just shirts, boxers, dust, the usual. But on the closet floor, a small object had been left that hadn't been there before. A coin, old, weathered its surface, etched with symbols. He didn't recognize circular runes that pulsed faintly, as if responding to his breath. He reached for it but stopped. Something in his gut screamed not to touch it, that it wasn't left for him to hold, but to see, to understand. And beneath that coin, in faint scratches dug into the floor, were words, "Stay in the dark." Marcus staggered backward. It wasn't a warning from the presence, it was a warning about it. He looked toward the mirror again. The fog was gone, and in its place, his reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite right. Its smile was just a second too slow, its pupils just a shade too dark, and it didn't blink when he did. Marcus didn't scream. He COULDN. Single quotes, because in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't showing him something unfamiliar. It was showing him something he had already forgotten, something he had let in long ago. The moment of truth, the false reflection, held Marcus's gaze with a calm, unwavering intensity. He blinked, it didn't. He tilted his head slightly to the left. It did not move. There was no delay this time, no mirrored reaction at all. It was not him, it was wearing him. The realization hit with the weight of truth. Whatever was behind the glass had spent the night learning him, studying his habits, his rhythms, his emotional tics, and now it had grown bold enough to replicate him. Not just his face, but his presence. He backed away from the mirror, slowly, measured steps, as if trying not to provoke an animal that could already smell the fear on his skin. But then the reflection smiled, gently, calmly, like it knew something. He didn't. Like it had already made the choice for him. The lamp flickered back to life with a quiet hum. The light washed over the room, banishing the deepest shadows, but not the sense of dread. If anything, the clarity made it worse. There was no illusion to hide behind now. Marcus looked at the mirror again. His reflection was gone. It had simply vanished. The glass now showed only the room behind him empty, still, normal to normal. He glanced toward the closet. The coin was still there, but the words carved into the floor had changed. Now you choose. His breath caught. The hum in his head surged, syncing with his heartbeat. Choose what? He turned to the bedroom window. The street outside lay still in the moonlight, familiar, real, but that comfort was fragile, forced, like scenery on a stage. He could leave, run, break the mirror, burn the coin, pretend none of this ever happened. But deep down, he knew. This was never about escape. It was about acknowledgement. The presence hadn't forced itself into his world. He had invited it. When he ignored the tapping, when he stared too long into the mirror, when he listened to the whispers, every act of attention had been a door unlocked. Now the final lock was waiting, and it was inside him. He looked again toward the hallway. The mirror shimmered just for a moment, not like heat, not like fog, like a surface, a boundary. His reflection stepped back into view, but now it was different again. Its face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, a void in human shape. Yet he understood, all it waited for was acceptance. He stepped forward, drawn as if in a trance. The hum in his skull quieted. He raised a hand toward the glass. So did the reflection. Their fingers touched. No resistance. The surface gave way, not like breaking, not like shattering, like water. And behind that reflection, behind the stillness, Marcus glimpsed a corridor of impossible angles, hallways that bent in directions his mind strained to process. The presence wasn't a single entity. It was a place, an echoing void of abandoned selves and false realities, all waiting to be inhabited. One step forward, and he would know. Not just what haunted him, but why. But two step through would be two. Leave something behind. His place in this world, his reflection would stay smiling, perfect, complete, and it would live in his name. He stood trembling, one hand half submerged in the mirror's surface, the other clenched at his side. This was the moment. Was this just coincidence? Or intent? The inevitability of darkness. Marcus stood on the threshold between worlds, one foot rooted in the apartment he had always known, the other inching into a realm that shouldn't exist. The mirror's surface rippled where his fingertips pressed, like a calm lake disturbed by a single drop. It didn't feel cold. It didn't feel warm. It felt like nothing, and that terrified him more than pain ever could. Behind the reflection, the shapes in the void began to move, not aggressively, not hurried, but with purpose. Figures without detail, human-like, but blurred at the edges. They wandered down warped corridors that defied geometry, as if walking within a space that existed inside a thought rather than in a place. Their movements mirrored the slow grace of deep-sea creatures, silent, drifting, endless. He couldn't breathe, not because he was suffocating, but because something was breathing for him now. The hum inside his skull shifted again. It no longer pulsed. It spoke not in words, in truths. He felt it instead of heard it. You were always hollow. You left the door open every night. You asked for something to notice you, and it did. His arm trembled in the mirror's liquid surface, now submerged up to the wrist, but it didn't feel like drowning. It felt like belonging, like he was finally going where some hidden part of him had always known he belonged. He wanted to scream. He didn't know why. No one would hear, not because he was alone, but because his voice no longer belonged to him. And then a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, laughed out from behind. He turned there. Standing in the hallway just beyond the bathroom door was himself. Perfect, composed, asleep in the eyes. The doppelganger raised one hand and pressed a finger to its lips. She then had smiled too wide to knowing and stepped back into the shadows, disappearing from view. Marcus stumbled away from the mirror. His hand slipped free of the surface. The void rippled once and sealed shut, leaving only the reflection again. His own face now stared back at him. No blank features, no delay, no false mirroring. Just him. But it wasn't him anymore. He watched as the reflection's eyes moved first. Before his own, he stepped left. The reflection stepped right, and when he didn't move at all, the reflection smiled. That was the moment he understood. There had been no choice. Not really, because the darkness wasn't waiting for him. It was becoming him. It had studied him, copied him, mimicked every twitch, breath, and thought until it no longer needed to exist behind glass. It had stepped through, and now he was what remained on the other side. Alone, empty, a shell without a shadow. And in that silence, the final truth echoed through his bones. Fear isn't the thing that chases you, it's the thing that replaces you. The fear that stays days past, maybe weeks. Time became unreliable. The mirror was gone, not shattered, not removed, just gone. In its place hung a black rectangle, smooth and lightless, like obsidian that refused reflection. Marcus no longer checked it. He didn't need to, because he no longer trusted what he'd see. His apartment had grown quieter, not in a peaceful way, more like a library no one visits. Sounds existed, but they never seemed to come from the world he lived in, only through it. Whispers now echoed in pipes. Floorboards groaned even when he stood still. Lights flickered to a rhythm not set by any electrical fault, but by deliberate design. He still lived in the same place, same furniture, same clothes, same routines, but it no longer felt like his life, because something else was living it for him. The Marcus that walked to the store, the Marcus that greeted neighbors with tired eyes, the Marcus that answered texts and attended meetings and nodded at passing cars. He was still visible, but he wasn't this Marcus. This Marcus was the one that stayed behind, the one that watched through the glass, but could no longer cast a reflection. He tried to leave once, packed a bag, took his keys, opened the door, but outside wasn't outside anymore. It looked like the street, the trees, the sky, the sounds of birds and buses and casual footsteps. But it felt wrong, like scenery printed on paper, a memory rendered in low resolution. He closed the door and never tried again. And each night, when he lay in bed, the whispers would return, not to frighten him, to remind him that this fear wasn't over, that it had become him. He would hear the tapping on walls, on glass, sometimes inside his pillow. He would hear the breath that wasn't his. He would feel the gaze, even in total darkness. Not a punishment, a presence, constant, unyielding, familiar. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, he would see things behind his closed eyelids. Faces with no features, rooms with no exits, reflections that stared without blinking, and above it all, always whispering, always watching. The thing that took his place, it didn't need to haunt him, it didn't need to torment him, because the greatest horror wasn't death. It wasn't being devoured or possessed or broken. It was being forgotten by the world, and by oneself. And as he lay there, night after night, Marcus wondered, if I scream, would anyone hear it? If I vanish completely, will anything notice? Or has it already happened and I'm just the echo? The truth settled in like ash on cold skin. He hadn't escaped the fear. He hadn't defeated it. He had simply become the space it needed, and now it wore his voice. Could you sleep after hearing this? What do you think really happened to Marcus? Was it sleep paralysis or something far worse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you dare, explore another tale before bed. The mirror is still waiting.